Thank you. Very, very warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. I know we are a little bit into the lunch session. Many of you may be already hungry, but don't worry, we'll keep it interesting. Okay? So thanks a lot. And before we start this panel discussion, I just want to start this with a story. How many of you know Ada Lovelace? I see one hand. Okay, 2 hands, 3, 4 hands. Okay, so Ada Lovelace was an English mathematician born in 1815, died 1852, and she's known for her remarkable work on Charles Babbage's first proposed general computing model. In fact, she's known to have written a pseudocode or an algorithm which is supposed to be the first code written for computers. So when we talk about future of AI, women are integral part of it because we were at the origin of it. Okay? Thank you. So with that, I want to start with Namrata. Okay? Namrata, we talk a lot about barriers for women in tech. But let's flip this, okay? Can we talk about what are those differentiated things that we bring to the table and maybe some real life examples where women have created these breakthrough moments?
Sure. Thank you. Am I audible? Okay. So I think, first of all, they say it takes a village to raise a child. Honestly, it takes a village to actually put the AI solution also together. It's not just women. I think it's a whole community actually coming together. But women in particular can make a huge difference and essentially play to their strengths. So one of the key things I have actually seen is that, more than half in our research, more than half of the enterprises basically said that they're investing in creating, Gen AI use case for a chatbot. Now we know how the previous generation of chatbots worked. Right, that was a miserable failure, but it was interesting to see that it's still going to be, one of the key investments from a Gen AI perspective. What I'm getting to with this is that the expectation from this generation of chatbot is about more contextual, empathetic conversations, and that empathy is where I think women play a key role in bringing, a lot of the empathetic conversations into the data level, the foundation level, to sort of being able to influence how the outcomes will be derived, right? The second piece is when we ask some of the enterprises as to what exactly is the biggest challenge for them to adopt AI or scale AI, only 20% actually said that it was lack of data, which means 80% of the organization said they had data. So what it means is they have data in abundance, but where is the quality, right? And where I'm getting to with this is that from a quality standpoint, at the foundation level, having that right data labeling is one, I'm sure most of you can resonate, is one of the key factors where we can, segregate or, label correctly. At that stage, I was reading an interesting article that it's such an intense work and it requires a lot of patience. And women, are known to have a lot of patience. And I'm wondering if that's a role, where women can actually play a huge role in terms of producing more accurate, precision data, right? And finally, I would say AI, the way it's taking inroads into industry verticals as critical as healthcare. The fact that we can detect early breast cancer in healthcare with the use of technology is a huge achievement, right? And imagine us influencing the data from subtle to loud symptoms. What we go through from a women health standpoint, it's only we who can actually create the difference in the data. It's, so I think these are just 2 or 3 examples, but the way we can create, or influence the data at that level, it's phenomenal, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more innovation in that space.
Yeah, I think that empathy thing that you said is very, very powerful because That's an intrinsic women behavior. So thanks for relating that to the data part of it. Wonderful.
True.
Yeah. So let's shift gears to biases and diversity. There's a story that Chicago Crime Department, way back 10 years back, they built a machine learning model based on the past crime data to predict the individuals who are most likely to commit violent crimes. This came under a lot of scrutiny because of data biases and transparency issues. And this was decommissioned in 2020. So we know that, bias in data is a real issue. So I'll start with you, Amrita. With this thing, we know that, when we build models with diversity, they always perform better. But what does it mean in practice? And if you can give us some real life examples from your experience of how you've done this.
Absolutely. So I've been at Google for almost 14 plus years, almost 15 years now. And data quality, I mean, what Namrata just mentioned, is at the core of making successful search results, making good ads visible to people. It's at the core of every product that we build, good data, and then understanding bias and fairness. Now, one of the things that has made it really challenging is the Gen AI world. Because in Gen AI, the AI itself is learning and coming up with new kinds of images. So if you search for CEO, you're probably not going to see a woman CEO being projected, because that bias is very fundamental in the training that we have provided. Now, where did this AI come up with all these terrible biases? Any guesses? Well, it came from all of us, right? It is in fact just reflecting the biases back to us. It is showing us the mirror of who we are as a society and what preferences we all carry. And that's why this becomes a very nuanced topic and a very, very challenging topic. It's no longer just about technology. It's not about just showing the right search result. It's about making the right change, helping people make the right decision. And that's why we take this very, very seriously. Now, from a more practical point of view, when we are building a product, we take a lot of care towards personalization. I mean, at this point, if you're building any product with an AI platform or AI base, then you have to be able to connect with the user. And you will not be able to connect with the user if you're training with only your one set of biases where only certain things can happen. So weddings always have to be white gown and, Western weddings. If that's your bias, you're not going to be able to reach more than 50% of the world. If you're going to say CEO is only women, you're not going to be able to reach a significant part of your user base. So even from a very practical point of view, it makes sense for Google and anyone who is building AI products to understand that when you add biases, you limit your audience, you limit your scope. And the wiser thing to do, even from, forget the social, moral and all those aspects, those are of course very, very valid reasons to do the right thing. But even just from a business point of view, if your audience, you want your audience to be broader, then you have to be able to reach and connect with them. And for that itself, you will need to work through these measures to reduce biases and add fairness in the system. So that's just a very brief overview of how we are thinking about it.
Perfect. I think you rightly said the biases come from us as society. So the Siri voice on my phone is a male voice. And when my daughter heard it, she said, why? It should be a female voice. And I asked her, why? And she was like, oh, I didn't think why. Because that's how they're ingrained. All the assistants have to be female voice, right? Yeah. So I'll come to you, Radhika, okay? We know bias are real. So what do we do at organization level to handle these kind of biases?
Well, like she said, addressing bias, I think, is an ongoing journey. But compliance is real, accountability is real, we need to take these seriously. I think for now, organizations can still have humans in the loop for reviews, just determining whether the decisions that are made by AI systems are in line with human judgment, human ethics, our goals, right? So that's one way. And for example, I think at Intuit, what I've seen is AI is more democratized now, and there are people across the company who want to try and build out Gen AI based experiences, and they want to deploy it in production, right? So we have strict governance in place, strict guidelines, where we've got a well-defined responsible AI process that also includes bias testing. And so everything is documented, well-reviewed, and then we put it out into production. So I think this can make a huge difference.
Thank you, thank you. Coming to the issue of diversity, Smita, I want to come to you. The usual solution to bring diversity is hire more women, right? But what should organizations do beyond that in terms of fundamentally changing the culture so that this diversity can thrive?
Okay, thanks for that question, Rashmi. So I think you have highlighted a very important fact or a truth, I would say, right? Like, I mean, of course, hiring more women is the first and crucial step for diversity, but that's just the first step, right? So the real change, I feel, would happen when organizations create a culture of inclusivity and they help the women colleagues, they help them long term, and they also elevate them to leadership roles. So one of the quotes from Sheryl Sandberg, it says that we need women at all levels to really change the conversation, right? And that would not be possible unless companies create a culture where women actually thrive and not merely exist. So, and what I mean by inclusivity here is, we don't just want a seat at the table, right? We want a culture where the voice of every woman is heard, is respected, is encouraged. We get equal opportunities for leading key projects, and of course, fair promotions and fair pay, right? So, some of the initiatives which I feel companies could take in this regard is, one is bringing in transparency with respect to the pay and the promotion criteria. So when this happens, all the facts are upfront on the table for everyone. So there is no need for women to feel isolated or they are not being paid fairly. So that is one of the things. Second thing, as I already mentioned, that the leadership also needs to take steps in that direction to create a more inclusive culture. Third, I believe that it's also for us women to normalize advocating ourselves, right? So, yeah, so a woman negotiating her salary is typically considered a very bold move, right? Whereas when a man does the same, it's considered like he knows his self-worth and is very confident. So that perception needs to change, and we need to make it more normal, like women negotiating her salary, right? So some of these things are also unintentional. I see these biases that are created in the work culture, and in companies they are unintentional. It's not intentional. It's been coming across years of social norms and everything put together. But that needs to change definitely, and these are some steps which I believe could be taken.
Yeah, I think that salary negotiation point is very, very relatable. Yeah. So let's shift our gears to career growth in AI. And with this section, again, I'm going to start with a story. How many of you have seen this movie, Hidden Figures? Wow, very less hands. If you have not seen it, please go ahead and see it. It's the story of 3 mathematicians, African-American women mathematicians working at NASA in early 1960s. In fact, one of them, Katherine Johnson, is known as a human computer, and she's the one who was responsible for creating the trajectory of NASA's orbital missions, okay? And this was pre-computer era. She would, if you've seen the movie, you'll see that she would do these calculations on paper, okay? So women have always been part of such complex careers, yet when you come to the young generation today, we see women being hesitant about the AI career growth, and they seem this as a lot more coding, a lot more mathematics, a lot more statistics. So I'll come to you, Amrita. What are some of these misconceptions about the career growth in AI?
No, excellent question. So I've been in AI for more than 20 years, before it was cool or any such thing. And yes, earlier, AI meant you could get a PhD on the topic, or you could be an ML scientist, you could be doing feature engineering, and it was very, very deep technical work. You would be working with mathematics and algorithms and all that things. With the current transformation in AI that has come about, now AI is no longer meant for only the very elite, deep tech folks. It is really meant to transform every single function, every single industry. And with that in view, we have a lot of low code, no code kind of options for AI. And in fact, staying away from AI at this point is a huge career risk. Instead of, embracing it, no matter what role you are in. I mean, even if you're in HR, you should be looking into AI and how you can use AI to do your job better. Now, given that tech has democratized AI, and I really like the word that you used over there, given that tech has democratized AI and made it accessible to everyone, it's the domain knowledge that really becomes the differentiator. So I would highly encourage everyone to, first of all, not hesitate to get into AI. It is much easier at this point than it was even 5 years back. And second, please, please, please make that active effort to go into it, because if you don't make that proactive effort, you will very likely be left behind. In fact, I think Tridence is doing an excellent thing by hosting this event and creating that priority in everyone's mind, that this is where we all need to be headed, no matter what practice, what industry, or what role you're in. So just few thoughts on that.
Thanks for that. With the next question, Amrita, I'll come to you. Imposter syndrome. All of us have been at it. Many of us have beat it. What is your message to women to, what would you do to get over it? Some tips or forward moves.
Yeah, I think we still go through sometimes. I would say two different perspectives. There's an individual perspective as well as what companies can do, right? Individually, I think it's important to recognize. And once you acknowledge and recognize your imposter syndrome, that right there is half battle won. And second piece is, I think the only other way to sort of gain confidence is continuous learning and speak up. Right, there's no other option, there's no shortcut to be able to beat that whole, self-doubt, or whether I should speak in a forum, should I not speak. You just have to do it, and once you start doing it, you will eventually sort of overcome. But that confidence will be built only when you start also investing, because you need to also train your own AI models internally. Because even AI models need time to learn, we also need time to learn, and if AI models need to be fed the data, we also need to feed ourselves with data, right? So that's how it is going to work. But on the company side, right, no matter what we do individually, there is a play from the company side as well. I think what is most important is, in the era of AI, where the skill sets are also shifting, it's more of creativity, design thinking, vocalizing your ideas, which is very important. How do you sort of create a culture, a psychologically very safe environment for someone to be able to say that, judgments dropped, right, and still be able to make your point, fail fast, learn fast, come back, learn from your mistakes. That's a very, very inclusive culture one the company has to create. Second is also to be able to upskill and investing in the training of the employees also become very, very important, particularly for some of the women who are coming back from their maternity break. I see a lot of companies running campaigns now, return to work, back to work, all these campaigns. I did one too at my organization for like an internship for women who were returning from career. And just the 5 months, a couple of them walked up to me and said, my confidence is back, and they basically said, I didn't know I had it in me still. I didn't know I was going to be back into the corporate world. Makes a huge difference, and as a company, I think it's super important that we build that whole organizational, to sort of encourage and give that platform as well. So it's really both of them at play, and it's not one or the other.
Yeah, I think that back to work thing, we're also doing something similar. I know Rekha would talk about it later. But yeah, very, very valid point. With that, I would again shift the gears to the future of AI part of it. We've always seen technology either taking the jobs away or changing the nature of jobs, whether it was power looms way back in 1800 or whether it's AI today. Okay? So again, sorry, I'll come to you, Smita. Sorry. Little bit of fumble. No panel discussion is complete without it. So as we keep hearing about AI disrupting the jobs, okay, what are some of the new roles that will emerge, which we have not heard about it? Sorry, the question is to you, not to you. I'm sorry.
I was
Amrita.
confused.
What are some of the new roles that you think are going to come up, which we have not yet envisioned?
So yes, pretty much the way people have been doing things is going to significantly change. There are two ways in which industry is looking at AI. First is replacing existing jobs. What used to take 50 people, can I do it with 25 people? That is, I feel, a very short-term view of looking at things. You're trying to do the same things in the same way with a little bit of tooling and automation in AI. The revolution really comes from looking at what new opportunities can AI create for my business. And that is the side where new roles come into picture and where new domains open up. So this side is definitely, I would say, an open discussion. The jury is out there. It's not completely written in stone at this point. But I would like to share some insights on where people are headed on this side. So first of all, people are looking at increasing revenue. And if you look at the industries, I think financial services and healthcare are some of the early adopters of AI that are looking to bring in new audience into their domain through the use of AI. So wherever we are able to drive this growth in AI, that is where you will see a lot of new jobs being created. And like I said, AI being the tool, the domain knowledge and the relationships, those will begin to matter more. So if you have domain knowledge in healthcare, then you could probably upskill on AI and put the two together and have a career path. So keep an eye out on what domains are moving fast, and if something clicks with where you are well matched, and then take it from there.
So for the next one, Radhika, I'll come to you. Okay? Fast forward 10 years. Do you think with AI, is it going to be more automation, more creativity, or a blend of both? How do you envision the future?
Certainly more automation. We can already see, agents are actually able to automate a lot of complicated tasks. I think humans and AI are going to be able to work more seamlessly together, as is evident, like I said. 10 years from now, I see people with like an AI assistant in their pocket, right? Like, hey, this is not just AI, not just doing personalization or recommendations as we've seen it in the primitive systems doing simple automation and stuff. This is going to, be much ahead of that, right? So we can expect it to be more conversational to begin with, right? So things are way more easier for people. It's going to be more context aware. And I think also that AI will be way more proactive, because right now I think, hey, I spot some sort of a problem, I use AI and I'm doing a lot of things retrospectively, right? That will shift because people are going to be like, okay, I'm going to be more data driven because here are some insights that are helping me, stay ahead of my problems and fix things, as opposed to being, retrospective and looking at it later. So, yeah, a lot more seamless collaboration between humans and AI.
And Smita, do you think with this lot of automation, will it make work-life balance better, especially for women who are juggling too many roles at home as well as at work? Well, so AI innately has this power of simplifying the lives of people, right? But then as the great quote from Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So it's very important how people make use of the AI technologies. It has the power to simplify or like ease the work-life balance as well as complicate it if it's not used the right way. So, in the ways in which it could help the work-life balances is by, of course, automating, right? Automation of the regular mundane tasks on a day-to-day basis. And of course, we also have some smart homes nowadays where we have the AI-assisted bots and robotic child healthcare bots and a lot of things coming in. So these are some of the ways in which it could help in the work-life balance, but the negative side of it in which it might hamper is also I see that it might blur out the boundaries between the personal and the professional life. With these remote tools being available, right, there is constant connectivity available for all of us, and that might probably bring in implicit expectation from the employers and the colleagues as well to be constantly available. So where you might not get your personal space and time as much as you thought you would have got. So that's how I see it. So I would say it's up to the people, right? So the challenge in AI is not its intelligence. I would say it's the owners who are using it. So we have to be responsible enough to make either use of it for our convenience or our loss.
Yeah, I think that point about always connected, it's already happening in post-COVID era. And during COVID, the automated part, I loved the Roomba doing the vacuum cleaning of the house. Seriously, that was the most amazing part. Okay, so for the next segment, we come to rapid fire. And I'll start from you again, Smita. Its answer should be in 1 or 2 words, very quickly. Okay? If AI wrote its own autobiography, it might be called as?
Zero to hero.
Nice. If AI had emotions, the first thing it would feel is?
Curiosity and wonder. It's learning all the time.
Yes. The one thing AI can never replace is?
My cook.
If AI had a morning routine, it would start the day by?
Sorry?
If AI had a morning routine,
Morning
routine, like meditation, yoga, whatever, what would the AI would start the day with?
Hello world.
Okay.
Spoken like a true programmer.
The biggest misconception about AI is?
That AI will take away your jobs.
Valid. In 10 years, AI will be able to do this, but not this.
Oh, I keep getting this question. Anyway, I think it's definitely going to automate a lot of complex tasks, but it can't do this, right? That was the next part.
Maybe the cooking part, right?
Maybe the cooking part for sure. It can't, replace human connection. I feel
Human
that's-
connection, yeah, that's a great point. The AI I want to see in the future is?
An enabler.
Sorry?
An enabler. Definitely like an assistant which will just make my life simple. So, an enabler.
Okay. And the last one, the ultimate power move for women in AI is?
Confidence in yourself, in your dreams, in believing that it's going to work out for you.
Thanks a lot. So I think with that, we close this segment and we open for a few questions from audience. Anyone has any questions? We have some time, right? Yeah, oh wow. We are on time, perfect. We have some time. I think we are the only panel who did really well. That shows our efficiency. Yeah, any questions?
Thank you everyone, and great insights from all of you. I am from the talent acquisition team, and we have been hiring for leadership roles. So my question is like, I have been hearing about glass ceiling and diversity, increasing the percentage of women, but have we already broken that glass ceiling, especially in the tech leadership roles? What are your views on that?
You want to take? Yeah, you can go ahead.
Have we broken the glass ceiling for tech leadership roles? I'm not sure. I don't think so. You know, being in a women in AI panel, you want me to tell you that everything is rosy and everything is solved. It's not solved. But there is a lot more awareness. And there are a lot more sponsors, there are a lot more people in senior roles who are now willing to take that chance of hiring someone, or you know, even if it's a woman leader. So it's much, much better than where it was, say, 10 years back. But I think there's more work to do. And that's why for all the men and women in this room who are maybe earlier in your careers, you know, we are trying to do our job in moving the needle and making it more fair and equitable, and we've got it so far, but I think there's much more work to do, and all of you can carry it ahead into your careers as you grow.
Anyone, if you want to, please feel free to add, otherwise we can.
Yeah, I would just concur with her thoughts. I think from where it was to where we are today, we've made a huge progress. There's no doubt about it, but we're still miles away from achieving a certain level of equality in certain cases. But I think the very fact that companies are aware, acknowledging and introducing programs to enable is a good sign in the direction.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I also have a similar take. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, do we have one more? Yeah, okay. The voice is not well, Neha, is it?
She's got a bad throat. She's not able to speak. Okay.
Yeah, she did a great work at the booth yesterday, so that shows in her throat. So.
Is a manager here? Please make a note during the press. Oh, you're the manager. Okay.
That we already spoke about the biases and the gender biases, everything in AI models. I'm not sure if you are able to understand that. And we know that it starts right from the textbooks, which is the first data, objective data that we have. How are we handling it at the technology level to overcome those biases, understand the model which have those biases and rectify it?
Right.
Yeah, I think you would be at the right.
Did you hear the question well?
Not entirely.
If you could repeat it, Arun. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I was saying that we already discussed about the biases in models that we have, and we know it start right from very early stages of our society. We know that the textbook, which is the first objective data point that we have those biases. So how are we using technology to kind of overcome those biases, understand and then correct it?
So I know, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know why, Namrata, you're laughing. We discussed about this during the call, right? Yeah, Rashmi and
So maybe
Namrata,
Amrita, if you want to take that answer, since you discussed this with Arun.
No, I think basically I was just telling them and we were discussing. So my daughter's social studies textbook, between a woman and a man, a woman was in the kitchen and a man was at the office. So I literally asked her to skip the chapter. I said, even if you score less marks, it's okay. But you're right, I mean, it's not something that we can just change overnight at a certain level. It has to be at the grassroots level, and it has to start from the fact that we are changing it from the education level. And it's not just the girls, it's also about educating the boys about the awareness, like the imposter syndrome that I was talking. It's about telling the boys to say, drop your judgments, or telling your fellow women to basically say, drop your judgments, right? So I think one of the key things I've been discussing with some of the companies, and I know that most of them are doing actively, is to go to partner with the education systems to fundamentally change how the education systems are also operating and what needs to be taught. I don't think the good old systems of education in terms of whatever we were learning 10 years back is applicable. Syllabus has to change practically almost 6 months, every 6 months. You know, that's the change or the pace at which we are living. So I think I think the IT sector is honestly at a very nice position to be able to influence a lot of the education systems, and I see a lot of companies partnering and a lot of the education systems also taking help from the companies to be able to structure the syllabus in such a way that we are actually, coping with what today's world is, right? So it really starts at every level. It's at home, it's at the education system, it's at the syllabus, everywhere I think we need to bring about those changes.
I want to add to that, right? So when I hear the word bias, I'm sorry, it just doesn't occur to me first to think about gender bias. Okay? There's like all kinds of bias. Yeah, and so I was struggling to, understand that. And here's the point of view, right? There's only so much you can do. If your data is biased, there's a certain way in which your models are expected to work, and that's true. Like, if your data is biased, I don't think, for example, any amount of prompting that you do or anything else is not going to fix that issue, right? So I think when as application developers, we have to be aware of what sort of bias exists in the data, and I think it's prudent to then look at a set of guidelines to then say, okay, what should probably go in my system prompt in, let's say, a GenAI application, right? Because then it helps you address a particular type of bias head on. That's my take on it.
So I think with that, we close the panel. Thanks everyone thanks the panelists for making it very, very interactive. And I think we break for lunch after this. Yeah. Thank you everyone.
Right, thank you everybody. Let's give all the women leaders on stage a huge round of applause, everybody.